I'm Janet Tucker. The other person is apparently the host.
It must be me because I just made Cole.
Yeah.
Yeah, it must
Okay,
be.
good. Okay.
Yeah. So actually, Meta is
Cole,
really the host.
you're the co-host now.
All right.
There's 4 people on page 4 that are not muted.
Okay, so we'll get there. So the next step is to make Deb Weinstein a co-host.
What I can do right now, I'm going to do 2 things right now. I'm going to mute everybody, and Cole, as soon as everybody is muted, unmute yourself and start talking. And second, I'm going to give the share screen ability. Okay.
Yeah. But Deb, you want me to show you your slides or you want to show them yourself? I got them now, either way.
I should be, if you've given me permission. Let's see.
She's going to, but she hasn't yet.
Okay.
So Meta, if you can give Deborah Weinstein the co-host permission, that would be great. There you go. All right, Deb, you should be able to share your screen now. So let me introduce Deb Weinstein. She has served as the executive director of the Coalition on Human Needs since June 2003. Prior to coming to CHN, she served for 9 years as director of the Family Income Division of the Children's Defense Fund, and she worked to lift children and their families out of poverty, including the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or TANF, child support, jobs and wages, housing, nutrition, unemployment insurance, and equitable tax policy. And from 83 to 93, she was executive director of the Massachusetts Human Services Coalition, an advocacy organization focusing on people's needs, especially those with limited income. Deb, we are honored to have you with us. Please give us an update
Sure.
and an overview.
The honor is all mine. Well, I appreciate Sandy's presentation, and I'm sorry he didn't get to show his slides, which I'm sure he worked on, but the presentation was great anyway. Thanks for giving me this opportunity. Coalition on Human Needs is an organization of national scope organizations, labor, civil rights, faith groups, human service providers, and others. We come together to try to utilize the federal government to better meet the needs of people with low incomes and other vulnerable people. We have, for quite a number of years, focused on kind of 4 main principles, and one of them is protecting and advancing people with low income. Another is shared economic progress. Another is that I want to stress right now is making savings where we can make savings without damaging programs. And we have always identified the Pentagon as a source for making those savings. So I just want you to know that it is an issue that concerns us as human needs advocates. So now I'm going to see if I can. Okay, so here, this I've borrowed from the National Priorities Project, just looking at the annually appropriated expenditures. And I think you probably know this kind of thing, but not the current budget that we're in or the fiscal 23 budget, but the year before. Expenditures, 752 billion, 47% of all the discretionary or annually appropriated expenditures, and it's a rapidly growing amount. The president, as you heard, would give 813 billion, not just to the Department of Defense, but all of the military related expenditures. That's up from 782, up from 750 some odd that I just told you about. So it is rapidly growing. The House Armed Services Committee would go add another 37 billion to the president's request. The Senate Armed Services Committee, both of these majority are Democrats, would add 45 billion. Just one example, that lower number, the 37 billion, could extend the magnificently effective and heartbreakingly canceled child tax credit expansion that reduced poverty by 40% and then was allowed to expire, or as another example, could provide free quality childcare for more than 800,000 children. So those are just two examples. Over the years, just to show kind of where we're at, from fiscal 10 to fiscal 22, the domestic international appropriations, those things that are sometimes called non-defense, but that's such a negative way of putting it. I hate to say it that way. They lost 4% of their value, taking inflation into account, but VA medical care, and we certainly believe our veterans deserve medical care, but it is in this domestic side of things. It has been allowed to increase as the need has grown. You take that piece out, the rest of the domestic programs lost 10%. So it gives you a sense of the problems. We track low income oriented programs for the same time period. Of the 200 or so that we track, 63% were cut, 31% lost 20% or more. Again, all of this is taking inflation into account. We'll run out of time, so I don't want to, mention each and every one of these, but just to give you a sense of the severity of the cuts over this time period. Home heating and cooling, and right now we're in this very bad situation of very big increases in those kinds of costs. Even before those increases really started to happen, just the inexorable inflationary trends, even with low inflation, home heating and cooling lost 41%. Adult and youth job training, 20%, juvenile justice, 30%, child welfare services, 24%. You get the picture. Okay, so in times of rising costs, flat funding, which is where we are in this temporary period now, is a significant cut. The Secretary of Defense knows this. Just today, he put a letter out to congressional leadership calling for an omnibus spending bill, which means making decisions on increases or cuts, but not just flat funding, which is what we do when we have a continuing resolution, just a stopgap spending bill. We're in one of those right now. It expires on December 16th. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin wants us not to keep having flat funding. He wants us to pass increases. And the letter that he put out to leadership said that if there's flat funding, the CR or continuing resolution, and there are many Republicans who would like to do that. They don't want increases that we in the human needs community want. Well, he's saying no increases in research and development, no increase in procurement, delays in the nuclear triad, disruptions for service members and families. And he also mentioned the need to support veterans. I mentioned their health care. Well, you may disagree with the need for those increases. I'm just telling you what he's saying. And I'm also telling you that there are tremendous needs, as I think I'm attempting to demonstrate, for the human needs, the basic needs programs. And these are some examples from survey data that the Census Bureau has been collecting, we're comparing from August 2021 to a period about August, September 2022. During that period, the people with children who said they sometimes or often did not have enough to eat in the previous week, that rose by 41% during that time period. That is startling. And certainly part of that is they lost that child tax credit that was so helpful during that period. And of course, inflation has been taking its toll. Secretary Austin sent a letter. Well, we helped get together a letter from 411 human needs groups, which we sent to every member of Congress, citing the need for domestic and international funding at the House levels, which we see as the higher of the alternatives. You know, we made the same point about inflation. It's taking its toll. And we also need to help Americans recover, whether it's the pandemic, the economic impact of the pandemic, the inflationary problems due to the impact of the war in Ukraine, and natural disasters. There's a lot that's besetting our country. We have to help people respond. Well, who's Congress listen to? That's the question. And I would say, well, let me just say a little bit more about the struggle people have had. Using the same survey data that's quite current, just from this past month, that people saying that they found it somewhat or very difficult to pay their regular household bills. 41% of everybody surveyed said that they were having those problems. And of course, by race, it is, you know, as we unfortunately expect, much more prevalent. More than half Latino, more than half Black respondents saying that they're finding it that hard to pay their bills. We talked about high cost of home energy. More than a third said that they reduced or went without basic needs like medicine or food to pay for an energy bill. So we are trying to help encourage Congress that yes, you do need to respond, and you need to make sure that the domestic programs get the help that they need. And I'll see if I can, I think I tried to put this in the chat, this particular link. I hope you'll forward it around and send it yourself. It's just a letter that individuals can send to Congress. And here's the cautionary note here. You know, when I'm saying who is Congress going to listen to? Well, very often, it won't surprise you to hear that both the Secretary of Defense and the defense contractors have more sway than people like us. And because of that, that they're saying we need a full omnibus spending bill that responds to current needs and doesn't just flat fund, therefore cut seriously programs. If they listen to the Defense Department on this, it increases the chance that there will be this overall actual spending bill instead of flat funding. That means also that there may be increases in defense, which you don't want. And we think the extent of the increases are unwarranted. But that's the dilemma until we together come up with a strategy that does better to really make it clear to people the costs of this kind of free for all with Pentagon spending until we have a strategy, frankly, that's better than what we have now. Those of us who want human needs spending will find that almost our only route to getting increased spending is to be a little quiet in letting defense spending go forward. We don't really want to be there, but we know it's kind of desperately urgent to get the kinds of funding increases that I just was talking about, and many that I haven't even talked about, like housing, childcare, so many other things. So I'll stop now, but that is the dilemma we're in, and love to hear your thoughts about how we can extricate ourselves from it.
Thank you, Debbie. That was a great presentation. Appreciate it very much. I did put into the chat the link to this letter to Congress you mentioned.
Thank you.
And I'll just take a minute to show the slide that I had hoped to show at the beginning, which shows the increase in the Pentagon budget between 2015 and now. Blue is Biden's proposed budget this year, but the House already approved much more than that. The green is what a group of progressives had proposed as an alternative. They did not prevail, but they're out there. So let's take questions and discussion. If people could use the reactions button in the bottom and raise your virtual hand. Looks like Al has already done that. And anyone else who would like to ask a question or make a comment, go ahead. Al, why don't you go ahead?
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I have to ask, well, for the purpose of full disclosure, I should mention that I do work for a defense contractor. And even though I'm for peace, the way I rationalize it is that I think we should be a strong country and we should have a president who knows how to properly use a strong military. I think that what made us from just another ordinary country into a great superpower is the awesome victories we had in World War II over two evil empires, Japan and Germany. We're the only country that actively fought in both the Pacific and the European theater. No other country did that. And after the wars, we were able to have the prosperity. And the second point is that the technology that is developed for the military is used for civilian purposes like space exploration, the wonderful technologies we have like this Zoom meeting that with a computer. So there's a lot of fringe benefits to the military spending, and it's not necessarily all bad so long as we have a president who is responsible in using the strong military that we have. So my question is, any comments on that?
Thank you, Alan. We appreciate you coming into our space and sharing your views. Appreciate that very much. Sandy or Deb, would you want to respond, or maybe one of the Move the Money Committee members to comment on Al's points?
Well, I'll rashly say just a little bit that it isn't the position of the Coalition on Human Needs that there should be no Pentagon budget, and it's that we should be able to have careful oversight to ensure that the money is all being well spent, that inordinate profits are not passed along to defense contractors, and you know, it seems to me that part of our strategy needs to be able to share information from people more expert than I about where the military hardware is not really meeting our needs and is costing too much, or other aspects of the military, and not that they kind of get a blank check, not usually even being audited, and everybody else is. So it's not a matter of not having a defense structure, but where are the ways that we can make savings for the things that are not serving our security needs?
Sandy, did you want a piece of that, or shall we go on?
No, I'll jump in. I just want to say that the word defense, well, first off, I think it's, Debbie hits the nail on the head at how sad it is that in order to get a tiny crumb from the table, we have to go along and be linked with expanding the war budget. We do not have a defense budget. We have an offense budget. We have up to 800 bases around the world. We're armed to the teeth. We are, as Martin Luther King said back in '67, the US is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. That continues today. We set up a vassal entourage in NATO, whose purpose was to roll back and destroy wherever socialism existed. And in this year, and of course, both Reagan and Clinton are pillars of both warping our priorities in terms of human needs and greatly extending our military reach. Reagan, of course, priced the Soviet Union out of business. I was in the German Democratic Republic in the summer of '83 when NATO was rolling out its Pershing II missiles all along the FRG-GDR border, nuclear armed, facing east. The folks in the GDR and the Soviet troops that were stationed there were quite livid, were quite upset, were quite tense. And of course, his high stakes gamble worked. And the dissolution of the Soviet Union did lead to a tremendous, Cuba was in an emergency state, and the folks emerging from prison and underground and coming back from exile in South Africa did not see any way to implement the Freedom Charter of 1955, which gave a great outline for how to build a democratic social and society moving towards socialism. And of course, Clinton completed the re-Balkanization of the Balkans, bombed Serbia in order to break away Kosovo. So now we have the hypocrisy of NATO right up to the right up to Russia's border, provocation if there isn't one, and a NATO subsidiary in the Western Pacific, again stirring up trouble there. So I'm saying we don't have a defense budget, we have a war budget, and so we need to slash it, and we need to use those to rebuild our cities. I'm in Massachusetts. The Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority is falling apart. Why? Congress never allocates adequate funds year after year in the budget for public transportation. Anything with public in its name has a target on its back, especially since the Reagan and Clinton neoliberal transformation of our economy. And I see that in healthcare. I didn't get a chance to get into that, but that's fine. Thanks.
Thank you, Sandy and Deb. Let's go next to Tom Gogan. Tom?
First of all, I really want to thank both of you for your presentations, and I'm so glad to see Deborah's slideshow. Looking forward to Sandy's too later, maybe in the evening. And I want to kind of switch radically from national to local for a moment and ask Deborah in particular, but also Sandy, what they would think about what we're attempting to do in New York right now, which is where I am. We have what we call Move the Money New York City campaign. And what we're attempting to do is to get our city council to take a stand vis-a-vis the federal government, saying your priorities are messed up. We don't say it in those words in the resolution, but we say that we need to significantly reduce the Pentagon and military spending and to redirect those funds to our communities. We have built I'll admit, very loose coalition so far. Some unions, community groups, faith-based groups, et cetera. calling for this. And last time around, our last city council, we got exactly half the city council to support that. But my basic question would be, do you see that as one element in a strategy, a new strategy that would combine what we're doing, what you're doing nationally, what National Priorities Project is doing nationally and so forth, with a local base that we hope here in New York will be imitated all around the country, frankly?
I think you're absolutely doing the right thing. I couldn't applaud you more for this. I mean, I think what has been lacking is action like this, and that's exactly what you're doing. And in the past, it has worked very significantly, sometimes unfortunately on the other side and other issues, that if there is a successful strategy like approaching a local government, city council, and getting a resolution from them or similar action, that is then seen as an effective strategy, and other people try it in other areas. And all of a sudden you have something that's a little more like a movement instead of, 411 national organizations or local. I'm glad that we had those signing our group letter, but we just need more. And I think that that this is a terrific idea.
Thank you very much. I'm inspired by your work, and we are hoping that many more will be inspired by this approach. By the way, we want to have in-depth public hearings in New York on how our tax dollars are being spent and where we think that should be spent. So thank you.
Great. Okay, let's keep going. Eleanor Levine, you're up next.
Oh, hi. It took me a minute to unmute. I'm Eleanor. I'm from Oakland, California, and there are a number of things that are just racing around my mind. One of which is, why is there no money within the Pentagon budget for reconciliation, for peacemaking, for negotiating, for diplomacy? That's really one of the demands that we have to be making, is that it's not just we want money for killing, but we want, or we want to cut the budget for killing, but we want to grow the budget for negotiation. We want to grow the budget for diplomacy. And that's exactly the kind of fight that in Oakland we have been waging about defunding the police. It's the same kind of fight that that what we really need is an economy which is based on reconciliation and one on diplomacy. Now, and I'm not hearing that here, and maybe I'm not expressing myself properly, but I feel like that's missing from the conversation. And the other thing that I feel is missing from the conversation is that there is a lot of waste and profit being made out of the Pentagon or the military budget. But there is also in this country a huge amount of money that is not coming into our budget because the wealthy are not paying taxes. And that's part of the equation too. It's just not that the Pentagon is wasting money, but there is huge amounts, probably more than the Pentagon is getting, that we're not getting in taxes from the wealthy in this country. And those things, it seems to me, need to be woven into this dialogue. Anyway, thank you.
I can't resist saying a little something. When I said before that there are sort of four main principles that guide our budgeteering, and I only mentioned three of them, and the fourth one was revenues, fair and adequate revenues. And we do spend quite a lot of time, and you couldn't be more right. It's not my position that the military or the Pentagon has a small amount of money. I don't say that, but the amount of trillions of dollars in tax breaks going to corporations and the very wealthiest among us well, it's trillions, and there's an awful lot of savings that could be made there to invest in the programs we need. You know, a lot of it does have to do with power, and that's what we're fighting against. As far as your point, well taken point, that we need to be investing in peacemaking and negotiations for peace and other kinds of peacetime development that build international frameworks. In that pie chart that I showed from National Priorities Project, international affairs out of our discretionary spending is 3% of the budget, or was in fiscal 21, as opposed, so 3% as opposed to what's labeled military is 47%. So I don't know that the solution is to, I don't know, put the peacemaking functions in the Pentagon. We have a State Department. We have all kinds of international aid programs. Those could use more support, and perhaps that moves in the direction that you're talking about.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Jay Jury. Jay.
Thank you, Cole, and thank you for your perseverance with the trying exercise here of conducting this meeting. Also want to thank Deborah and Sandy for their presentations. And I do have a question. My question is for both of you. I would like to see us launch tonight, but it continued to be continued down the line, a strategic discussion. First, let me say I agree with what Tom Gogan said in terms of local initiatives, but what I'm wondering in terms of strategy, might it make some sense for us to not always look at this in general terms? It's important for us to understand both the Pentagon budget and unmet needs in general terms, and I'm not saying let's get rid of that or let's dismiss it, but what I am asking is, might make some sense to move forward to actually build some campaigns around some specifics. That is, look at specific weapon systems and specific weapons budgets, particularly pick out the ones that are the most wasteful. It'll take some research to do that, but I think we could do it. And then try to match those dollar amounts with what we would define as being the most critical unmet needs in this society. And that, in my way of thinking, would give people something to sink their teeth into with this, besides just having kind of a general discussion that we got too much Pentagon spending and not enough human needs spending. You know, let's talk about where the rubber meets the road. So that's my question, basically. And I'd like to know what the two of you might think about that.
Sandy, you want to go first since I blabbed too much?
Oh, never too much, Debbie, but yes, I didn't get a chance to really look at our healthcare system, our public health infrastructure, and the whole issue around environmental justice, as I had intended, had we been able to go on. In 1996, at the biennial convention of the American Nurses Association, Bill Clinton came and gave a keynote speech, and he spent most of his time talking about his so-called welfare reform. Folks there didn't need to listen to that, didn't want to listen to that. But after he left, one of the nurse delegates took the mic and on a point of personal privilege. With tears in her eyes, she talked about the demise of our public health infrastructure. This is 1996. It had already been decayed. By the time in 9/11, 2001, hundreds of nurses volunteered, called the Massachusetts Nurses Association, wanted to know how they could go to New York and help. Well, it was too late. That wasn't the issue. But we evolved a task force on emergency preparedness, and we tried to reach out to the public health officers of the 351 cities and towns in Massachusetts. And we had a very difficult time because in many small towns, there may be somebody assigned the role, but they've got 3 other roles, or they work part-time. We just did not have the structure in place to begin to look at emergency preparedness. And then, of course, with SARS and Ebola threats coming down the pike, didn't quite reach us, but we needed to be prepared. So we had heightened awareness. There's a dire need to be prepared. The COVID-19 pandemic came. And the schools, after a number of months, the following fall, we wanted to get the kids back into the classroom. And we began to look at old schools, poorly ventilated, small rooms crowded together. How can you put kids into that environment safely? And it should have dawned on us that we need a massive influx of funds to not only to rebuild the infrastructure, the connections, the personnel needed to be in place ahead of a disaster, ahead of a pandemic. We also needed to rebuild our educational infrastructure. We also had, in terms of healthcare, with the transformation of healthcare, and I put in the chat an article by Adam Gaffney, he's the past president of the Physicians for National Health Program. He's an internist at the Cambridge Health Alliance here in Massachusetts. He lays out in terms how healthcare is now a major funding stream to finance capital. It's about money. It's not about human service. It's not about meeting needs. It's not about keeping people healthy or helping them get better. My community hospital, my 114-year-old community hospital, once a city hospital, was shut down because it didn't make enough money for the for-profit folks who bought it out of bankruptcy. Rural hospitals across the country, particularly across the South, are closing day after day after day. Just read. I get the industry news every day, the headlines, and I just see this. This is everywhere. Our healthcare system is a mess. It's a system of there's a great extreme. Highly technical medical centers that cost a bundle, and community hospitals and clinics that are going by the wayside. In Boston, our second children's hospital just closed, and our first primary, Boston Children's Hospital, is in the process of a $1 billion expansion. There are not enough beds. Community hospital pediatric services have been shut down. There aren't enough beds. We need money to rebuild our healthcare infrastructure along anti-profit, not just nonprofit, but we need to rebuild that. So from my perspective, all of this, yes, we have what we need. We do have programs, like I said, in a couple of weeks, folks will be coming together in Massachusetts, as I expect they are in states across the country. In 2012, we had 91 cities and towns in Massachusetts where within the legislative districts where our budget for all ballot question carried. We won the day. We've won the argument. We don't have the power to do it. And I, for one, am quite frustrated, certainly with the Republican Party and increasingly with the Democratic Party in terms of their priorities. What we need to do is to build a united front against austerity, against racism, against war, and against fascism. And we need to do it at the ground level. The Massachusetts campaign for single-payer healthcare this past election day won 20 local ballot questions decisively around the need for fundamental healthcare reform, single-payer funding, and so forth. But we had hundreds of volunteers go out and speak to thousands and thousands of people talking about the issue. So that's what we need, is a united front from below, working in our communities and among our co-workers. And we need a united front from above, building the coalitions. We need to build an alternative power. Because the way I look at it, politicians come and go, but we need to build a movement that's going to stay, that's going to last, that's going to hold anybody's feet to the fire, and let candidates and officials elected out of that mass of folks that are in struggle.
I would just add, if there's time, Jay, your question about, maybe being strategic can include a look at, specific examples of waste in the military. And I think that may be a good way to go, whether it's the F-35 or somebody, again, more expert than I, can pick the example where there are very, very excessive costs, not well thought out, hardware, that kind of thing. I know that in the context of, as was mentioned earlier, tremendous tax breaks that the very richest get, including corporations, groups that I've worked with use specific examples of corporations, drug companies, others, certainly could be defense contractors, that were just kind of making out like bandits. And that was very effective in building a sense in the public that this was something to oppose. And I think something like that, and actually I think played a significant role in shifting public opinion, because really across the political spectrum, you get resentment about the tax breaks that the very rich get. And I think we could, if we were strategic about examples of excess in Pentagon spending, that it would be a way of educating more people that this is something that has to be reined in. So I hope that people can work together to think strategically about what the good specific examples are, and we should give it a try to find the opportunities to rein in that kind of spending.
Well said. Thank you both. And, I'll just extend an invitation to anybody here who wants to join in on campaigns like that, to target military spending, to contrast it with the human needs, domestic needs that are not being met. Get in touch with us. Jay or Tom, can you put an email in the chat of how they can contact our group, the Move the Money Task Force of CCDS? But we have two more questions. Sandy and Deb, do you have another 15 minutes to hang on? And we'll ask those two questions and call it a night. What do you say?
Sure.
Okay,
With you.
Michael Dover, you're next.
Okay, thank you. Really appreciate your presentation, Sandy and Deborah. Sandy, it sounds like you might have been a nurse. Debbie's a fellow social worker of mine. I'm so happy you're trying to stay optimistic. Here's the bad news. The social welfare state that we think we won, we did not win. It was put in place because elites realized they needed a social welfare system after World War II in order to defeat communism. So 30 years ago, I had a debate with Ian Goff, who's a theorist of human needs, about this. He said the Labor Party put through the National Health Service. It was based upon a conservative proposal from the Beveridge Commission in 1944. After the war, the elites globally recognized they needed social welfare. And there's a whole book on it now called Cold War Civil Rights. Also, they needed to have civil rights. Social welfare and civil rights were a tool to defeat communism. Now there's no Cold War. So where do we go next? I posted an article I published in our Radical Social Work Journal in 1998. This was going to be my dissertation for Mike Kennedy at Brown on the Cold War and social welfare, but I moved away. We got a problem here. We have to find a way, and my question is, how can we restore elite consent to social welfare expenditures? Sandy started hinting at it. It's profitable, and it doesn't have to just be for profit. It could be nonprofit, for profit, market sector. How can we expand the social welfare state? I'm convinced that the only way to do it is diplomacy, because at this point, you got 3 superpowers. I know there's debates about that. I say we have 3 superpowers, okay? And we need diplomacy to get all those 3 superpowers to realize we're not gonna be able to fight global warming, which is Ian Goff's latest work on global warming, unless we cut back on military expenditures, which, by the way, burns a lot of fossil fuels, and reinvest in human needs related expenditures. And so I guess, you know, while the local's great and we've been demanding peace, not war, since the 50s, I think really ultimately this has got to be a social diplomacy issue. We ought to demand it. The last time we were successful as a peace movement was in 1981 in Central Park. I'm not saying the anti-Iraq war wasn't significant. We did that by agreeing on the left that we would demand that both the Soviet Union and the United States disarm. And there was, well, you're going to say it's not the Soviet Union, it's not the problem. Yes, it was part of the problem, and China's part of the problem now. So that's my question.
Michael, we're running.
How can we do that? How can we build that movement for diplomacy for human needs, not military?
Thank you. Thank you. Sandy, Deb?
Well, I don't know if I'm smart enough to answer this
Good
question,
question,
Michael. It's a tough one. One small aspect I'll throw in is that we're not likely to win the extent to which we see all these major players that you're describing as, one unified whole. And that we're probably, our successes will be greater if we can kind of look strategically as to who will find it in their interest and others may not. It's sort of like the difference between the oil producing companies and or fossil fuel and I don't know, the health sector or something, that there, if we can identify where we can split one off from another and help important factions see that it is in their interest to align their powerful entities with people like us, that maybe we can make some gains that way. That's about as smart as I can get on this.
Okay, Sandy, you want to take it?
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. I think we need successful diplomacy to survive as a species. I see this as the third major confrontation. There was the, with nuclear implications, there was the Cuba Missile Crisis, where a Soviet missile 90 miles from the US shore was enough to precipitate World War III almost. I wasn't aware at that time. I was in a Jesuit novitiate. Actually, I was on a long retreat and totally cut off. And I knew nothing about it until a couple of years later. The second time I happened to be in the German Democratic Republic when Reagan was pushing the envelope very, very hard, fiercely, and with, I consider, very drastic consequences. And we see it right now. Yeah, we need to survive as a species. That's not going to solve the basic contradictions between various modes of production and societies and cultures, but we need to survive both in terms of climate and in terms of nuclear stand down. The Obama administration invested, passed the motion to spend $1 trillion over 30 years to renew our nuclear weapons. I believe that Russia decided later to do the same thing. So we're in a sense another nuclear arms race. This is stupid. Trump, whom we all hate, stopped that intermediate force nuclear, or dropped the, abrogated that intermediate nuclear force treaty that came as a result of Reagan's pushing in the 80s, and also the treaty with Iran, or the agreement with Iran about limiting nuclear developments and so forth. He got rid of both of those. Biden hasn't moved to replace them. There's scary continuity in terms of strategy from administration to administration to administration. Obama got a Peace Prize early on because he talked about cutting back, ditching all these old nuclear weapons. But then Honduras had a coup. Libya, once the most prosperous country in the African continent, was turned to rubble. And I won't tell you about Syria and the rest of Southwest Asia. So, only people power can make the difference. And what we're talking about now is how to get people together, clear-sighted, clear-headed, and focused, and to force diplomacy, because that is the current issue right now that's keeping us from going forward. I agree.
Cole, you're muted if you were talking.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. Norma, go ahead. Your question.
Hi, everybody. Somebody said that my information that Ukraine had to surrender in order to stop this. First of all, obviously, the killing would stop, the devastation would stop. Russia did not go in there for no reason, unprovocated. Russia is hardly the idiot it's made out to be by the press, and people have submitted. People are in a state of mind control. They have been ever since our owners have stood against the Bolshevik Revolution. 110 years of being taught from the cradle that the communism and socialism are bad. And people have gone on to believe that and dedicate themselves to that and rationalize that to an extent that just leaves me open mouthed as a devout communist all my life, which has become longer and longer. I'm 87 now. I've always been open mouthed at the acceptance that communism and socialism are bad. They're a struggle. There are a lot of major contradictions to be dealt with. People don't want to give up their nice automobile, their nice house, and all. My uncle said they can't have my carpets. You know, my uncle was a refugee from Ukraine, along with my mother.
Norma, if you could come to your question, please.
I don't have any questions.
Okay.
I have a lot of answers, and that's why I'm going on and taking some time that everybody else took. I posted a note in here about Harry's description of how warring has been essential to the US and to the economy here. The idea that this is greed, this is not greed, it's capitalism. And if we're not teaching honestly, then we have no business doing this. Sandy's expressions have been extremely satisfactory, very much dealing with the perspective that I have. Ukraine does not deserve to be upheld as it is being upheld. All the border countries have been ravaged. The wars of the past 110 years have all been related to the idea that communism is bad, and as soon as any place raises its head in liberatory struggle, it is assailed. And you've seen all that. I don't have to explain that to you, but you have to be honest about it.
Okay, thank you, Norma. Deb or Sandy, you'd like to respond? Okay, so thank you very much, and thank you, Norma. As I'm going to thank our presenters, Sandy and Deb, for very enlightening information. We're up against a fearsome problem here. And again, I'll just comment that there's an action letter by the Coalition for Human Needs. Please fill it out and send in that letter. And second is please get a hold of us if you would like to work on these issues with us going forward.
I'm copying the chat and I'm putting it in my computer. If you want it, you could write me a note. normaha@pacbell.net.
Thank you, Norma. Okay, thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thanks, Cole. Thanks, Debbie. It's been a pleasure. I had technical difficulties at my end the same way as everybody else did at your end. So we
Okay,
made it through the night.
we got through it. We got through it. Thank you.
Good to work with you all.
Cole, you do great work. I love mass peace.
Oh, yes. We need all the love we can get. Thank you, everyone.